Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a Victorian bedroom at 2am and trust me, you might not make it to dawn without throwing that brass bed frame out the window. Picture this, you're wrapped in starched linen sheets that feel like sandpaper, the air thick with coal smoke from the, and a grandfather clock in the corner ticking so loudly it might as well be counting down the minutes until your sanity snaps. This isn't just any bedroom, it's a meticulously designed nightmare built to turn even the heaviest sleeper into an insomniac by breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Maybe leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. There's something nice about knowing we're all here together, even if you're in Tokyo at noon and I'm in London at midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's start with the basics, your Victorian bedroom. The first thing you notice is the furniture, all dark mahogany carved with enough floral motifs to make a gardener jealous, but about as comfortable as a park bench. That massive four-poster bed, it's not draped in cozy blankets, but instead swathed in heavy woolen coverlets that weigh as much as a small pony. And those pillows, don't be fooled by the lace trim, they're stuffed with goose feathers that poke through the fabric like tiny daggers, ready to jab you awake every time you turn over. Here's the first kicker: Victorians thought soft mattresses were sinful. Yep, mainstream medical advice at the time said a hard bed kept your spine straight and your morals in check. So instead of memory foam, you're lying on a wooden platform covered in horsehair padding that feels like you're sleeping on a pile of toothpicks. Historians still argue about whether this was more about religious guilt or genuine medical belief, but one thing's for sure, no one was winning any sleep awards in these setups. Now, let's talk about temperature. The fireplace might be glowing, but heat rises and your bedroom is probably on the second floor. That means the air near your face is a balmy 75 degrees, while your toes are freezing under the covers. But opening the window is out of the question. Fresh air was thought to carry miasma, those mysterious disease-causing vapors they believed lingered in the night. So you're stuck baking under wool blankets or shivering under starched sheets, with no middle ground. Oh, and don't even think about moving around too much. The bed frame is made of brass, which sounds fancy until you realize every time you shift, the metal joints creak like a haunted ship. Your spouse, if you're unlucky enough to share this misery, is snoring beside you, but even if they weren't, the silence is deafening. Victorians didn't have white noise machines, just the tick-tock of that grandfather clock, the distant bark of a dog, and the constant hum of your own racing thoughts. Here's a fun little: did you know those decorative canopy curtains around the bed weren't just for show? They were supposed to trap your body heat and keep out evil spirits. But in reality, they just made the air stuffier and gave dust mites a cozy little condo to thrive in. No wonder so many Victorians woke up sneezing as well as exhausted. And let's not forget the lighting. Even if you managed to fall asleep, the dawn would wake you up faster than an alarm clock. Victorians didn't have blackout curtains. Instead, thin muslin drapes let in every ray of sunrise. Some wealthy families had heavier curtains, but they were often made of velvet that absorbed even more heat and made the room feel like a sauna. Now, imagine doing this every single night. No wonder it was such a huge problem in the Victorian era. Doctors were flooded with patients complaining of nervous exhaustion, which was basically a catch-all term for being too tired to function. But instead of suggesting a comfy mattress or a dark room, they came up with some truly bizarre cures that we'll get into in the next section. But for now, just lie back on your imaginary horsehair mattress and try to picture what it must have been like to live in a time when your own bedroom was designed to keep you awake. The Victorians may have had gas lighting and indoor plumbing, but when it came to sleep, they were seriously stuck in the Dark Ages. So there you are, lying on that god-forsaken horsehair mattress, desperate for anything to knock you out. Maybe you remembered the herbalist down the street promising that a lavender pillow would lull you into dreamland. Let's dive into the fragrant but possibly fraudulent world of Victorian herbal sleep cures, and spoiler alert, you might end up more awake than ever. First, let's set the scene. You tiptoe to the dresser, where a small linen bag stuffed with dried lavender buds sits beside a pile of yellowed newspapers. The scent is strong enough to make you sneeze. Victorians didn't believe in subtlety when it came to aromatherapy. This isn't just any pillow, it's a linen sack stitched with floral motifs, filled to the brim with lavender, maybe some chamomile if you're feeling fancy, and possibly a few stray mothballs because, well, no one really knows why. Herbal remedies were the backbone of Victorian self-care. Doctors and housewives alike swore by plants like valerian root, hops, and of course, lavender to calm the nervous system. The logic went something like this: if a scent was pleasant, it must soothe the brain. Never mind that science hadn't yet discovered neurotransmitters, they had centuries of folk wisdom, which is basically just old people guessing really confidently. But here's the lavender might have been the poster child of sleep herbs, but it was often mixed with some truly wild ingredients. I'm talking rosemary for clearing the mind, mugwort which smells like a wet dog, and even crushed rose petals because Victorians loved overcomplicating things. Some brave souls even added a pinch of camphor, which smells like mothballs and has the opposite effect of calming. Oops. Now, let's get to the part. Historians still argue about whether these herbal pillows did anything besides make your bedroom smell like a flower shop. On one hand, you have records of ladies' magazines praising lavender as a miracle cure, complete with testimonials from Mrs. Agnes Whitaker of Bath, who claimed she slept like a baby after stuffing her pillow with lavender. On the other hand, there's the little problem that no one was actually studying whether lavender improved sleep. They were too busy debating whether women should be allowed to wear pants. But let's say you're committed to this lavender pillow. You press your face into the scratchy linen, inhaling deeply. The scent is overwhelming, almost medicinal. For a moment, you think maybe it's working. Your mind starts to drift. Until you realize the lavender is making you sneeze, and the camphor someone added is giving you a headache. Classic Victorian overkill. Here's a fun twist: even if the herbs themselves didn't work, the act of preparing them might have been soothing. Picture yourself on a rainy afternoon, carefully drying lavender buds in the airing cupboard, stitching the pillow with tiny, precise stitches. It's like a Victorian version of ASMR, minus the whispered compliments about your haircut. Some historians argue that the ritual of making the pillow was more helpful than the herbs themselves, a sort of pre-bed mindfulness practice before mindfulness was a thing. But don't get too excited. Let's talk about the dark side of herbal sleep cures. Valerian root, another popular choice, smells like dirty socks but was thought to relax the nerves. The problem: it could take hours to work, and if you took too much, you'd wake up feeling like you'd been hit by a horse-drawn carriage. Hops were also popular, stuffed into pillows or brewed into a tea. The only issue: hops are used in beer for a reason: they can make you feel groggy, but also give you some seriously weird dreams. And let's not forget the placebo effect. If you paid good money for a lavender pillow from a fancy herbalist, you were probably convinced it would work. Victorians loved a good placebo. They even had quack doctors who sold bottles of colored water labeled as nerve tonics. So maybe the lavender pillow worked for some people, not because of the herbs, but because they believed it would. Sort of like how drinking warm milk before bed works for some people. Maybe it's the calcium, maybe it's the ritual, or maybe it's just an excuse to eat cookies. As you lie there, sniffing your lavender pillow and trying not to sneeze, you might start to wonder, is this really better than the horsehair mattress? Probably not. But at least you smell nice, which is more than can be said for most Victorian bedrooms. But don't worry, if herbs aren't your thing, the Victorians had plenty of other insane sleep cures up their frilly sleeves. Next time, we'll talk about the mechanical marvels that were supposed to rock you to sleep but probably just gave you a headache. So you've tried the lavender pillow, maybe even stuffed some hops under your mattress, but that horsehair is still jabbing you like a conspiracy of tiny pitchforks. Time to bring out the big guns, Victorian mechanical sleep aids. Picture this: you stumble to the corner of your bedroom, where a contraption that looks like a cross between a sewing machine and a medieval torture device sits humming ominously. That's right, welcome to the world of gears, cranks, and quite literally attempts to mechanize sleep. Let's start with the star of the show, the mechanical rocking chair. Not your grandma's gentle creaky rocker, but a steel-framed monstrosity with gears the size of dinner plates. Mainstream history fact: the Victorian era was obsessed with turning everything into a machine, including relaxation. Inventors believed that if they could replicate the motion of a parent rocking a baby, they could trick adults into sleeping too. Never mind that adults aren't babies, and most of these machines rocked like a drunk sailor on a stormy sea. Here SA, in 1857, a man named Horace Bedloe patented a self-rocking chair with adjustable pendulum. The design featured a foot pedal that you worked like a bicycle, causing the chair to rock back and forth. The brochure promised gentle, rhythmic motion to lull the weariest soul, but eyewitness accounts suggest it more closely resembled a chair having a seizure. Some models even came with a built-in music box that played Rock of Ages on repeat, because nothing says relaxation like a hymn about dying. Now for THE, did these machines actually help people sleep, or did they just create a new form of insomnia? Historians argue both sides. On one hand, you have patent applications filled with testimonials from grateful insomniacs. Mrs. E. Fletcher of Leeds wrote that Bedloe's chair allowed her to catch 40 winks between dinner and supper, which sounds impressive until you realize she probably passed out from exhaustion after pedaling for 3 hours. On the other hand, there are newspaper reports of people getting seasick from the rocking motion, or worse, getting their nightgowns caught in the gears. Let's take a closer look at one particularly wild invention, the somnolent swing. This was basically a hammock attached to a mechanical arm that swung back and forth. The idea was that you'd lie in the hammock, let the machine do the work, and drift off. The problem: the arm moved in jerky, mechanical motions, like a robot trying to mimic human movement. Imagine being swung like a sack of potatoes by a rusty robot. Relaxing, right? But wait, it gets better. Some inventors decided that motion wasn't enough, they needed sound too. Enter the sleep inducer phonograph, which wasn't a record player, but a box with metal combs that dragged across a rotating cylinder, making a sound like, well, imagine scraping your nails on a chalkboard, but slower. The theory was that the monotonous noise would lull you to sleep, but in reality, it probably just made you want to throw the machine out the window. Here's a fun mental image: you're lying in your somnolent swing, being jerked back and forth by a steam-powered arm, while the sleep inducer phonograph scratches out a lullaby in the background. Your spouse is trying to read by gaslight, but every time the machine creaks, they jump like they're being electrocuted. The cat has fled to the roof, and the neighbors are probably calling the constable to report a haunted house. But let's not forget the safety features, if you can call them that. Most of these machines had warning labels that read something like "Do not operate while asleep," which is about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Some models even had a panic lever that would stop the rocking, but good luck finding it in the dark when you're halfway to a concussion. Now, here's the kicker: these machines weren't cheap. A top-of-the-line mechanical rocking chair could cost as much as a month's wages, which meant only the wealthy could afford to buy themselves into a state of mechanical insomnia. The rest of the population had to stick with horsehair mattresses and lavender pillows, which might have been uncomfortable, but at least they didn't risk amputating a toe. As you lie there, tangled in the gears of your somnolent swing, you might start to miss the simple days of uncomfortable pillows. At least with herbs, the worst that could happen was a sneezing fit. With these machines, you're one loose screw away from becoming a human yo-yo. But don't despair if mechanical torture isn't your thing. The Victorians had something even better worse in store. Next time, we'll talk about the doctors who decided that the best way to cure insomnia was to put a metal cage on your head. No, I'm not kidding. So you've survived the mechanical rocking chair without losing a limb, but that horsehair mattress is still plotting your downfall. Maybe it's time to visit the doctor after all. Victorian physicians had a cure for everything, even if that cure involved strapping metal to your skull. Let's dive into the wild world of 19th century medical gadgets, where therapeutic often meant torture device with a fancy name. Picture this: you're sitting in Dr. Ebenezer Snodgrass's office, which smells like a combination of carbolic acid and old books. The doctor, wearing a top hat that's slightly askew, pulls a contraption from his cupboard that looks like a medieval helmet crossed with a birdcage. "Ah, yes," he says, polishing the metal with a handkerchief, "the latest in neurasthenia treatment, my patented sleep regulator headgear." Your first thought is that thing designed to cure insomnia or make you wish you were dead? In the Victorian era, insomnia was often blamed on nervous excitement, a catch-all term for anything that stressed you out, like, say, living in a time when your bed was made of toothpicks. Neurologists like Dr. Snodgrass, yes, that's a made-up name, but trust me, real doctors had weirder ones, believed that restricting head movement would calm the nerves. The logic was, if your brain can't move, maybe it'll shut up and let you sleep. Makes perfect sense, right here. The sleep regulator headgear wasn't just a metal cage. Oh no, that would be too simple. Some models came with leather straps that fastened under your chin, ensuring you couldn't even yawn without feeling like a dog in a muzzle. Others had tiny bells attached to the sides, which would ring if you moved too much, because nothing says relaxation like a constant jangling reminder that you're not sleeping. And for the truly fancy versions, there were even little pockets to stuff with lavender buds, because why not add herbal torture to mechanical torture now for the part? Historians still argue about whether these headgear contraptions were well-intentioned medical devices or elaborate jokes. On one hand, you have medical journals from the 1870s praising the headgear as a revolutionary cure, with case studies featuring patients like Mr. Hubert Farnsworth of Brighton, who claimed he slept like a log after wearing the device for 3 nights. On the other hand, there's the small matter that Mr. Farnsworth probably passed out from heat stroke, since the headgear didn't exactly allow for proper ventilation. Let's imagine you're brave or desperate enough to try this thing. Dr. Snodgrass fastens the metal frame around your head, adjusting the straps until it feels like you're wearing a helmet made by the Inquisition. The leather digs into your temples, and every time you swallow, the chin strap pinches your neck. You lie down on your horsehair mattress, staring up at the metal bars above your face, which are now casting spooky shadows on the ceiling from the gaslight. Here's a fun twist: Some doctors believed that mild electrical stimulation could help with insomnia, so they added tiny copper wires to the headgear. The idea was that a gentle current would soothe the neural pathways, but in reality, it probably just gave you a mild shock every time you moved. Imagine trying to fall asleep while your head is getting zapped like a lab rat. Relaxing, right? But wait, it gets better. If the metal headgear wasn't enough, some physicians recommended combining it with a magnetic pillow. This was a pillow stuffed with iron filings, because Victorians were convinced that magnetism could cure anything from indigestion to heartbreak. So there you are, wearing a metal cage on your head, lying on a pillow that could probably stick to a refrigerator, wondering if this is how you die. Now, let us talk about the practical problems. First off, sweating. Metal plus leather plus Victorian bedroom equals a recipe for a very sweaty scalp. Second, bugs. The headgear had all sorts of nooks and crannies where spiders could set up camp, which is great if you're into surprise eight-legged roommates. Third, romance. Good luck convincing your spouse to cuddle with you while you're wearing a medieval torture device. But perhaps the worst part was the social stigma. Can you imagine walking down the street with a metal cage on your head? Neighbors would probably think you were possessed, or at least extremely fashionable in a very niche way. No wonder most people used these things in the privacy of their bedrooms, though that didn't stop the servants from gossiping about the master's strange metal hat. As you lie there, trapped in your sleep regulator headgear, listening to the tiny bells jingle every time you breathe, you might start to miss the mechanical rocking chair. At least that thing only risked your limbs. This thing is risking your dignity. But don't worry, the Victorians had even more creative ways to make you miserable in the name of sleep. Next time, we'll talk about the home remedies that involved putting raw meat on your forehead. No, I'm not kidding. Bring a bib. So you've endured the metal headgear and survived the mechanical rocking chair, but sleep still eludes you. Maybe it's time to try a remedy that's equal parts bizarre and squishy. Picture this, it's 11 p.m. in your Victorian bedroom, and you're tiptoeing to the icebox. Yes, they had those with a candle in one hand and a butcher's knife in the other. Tonight, you're about to become a human meat platter in the name of sleep. Let us set the scene. You pull out a slab of raw veal from the icebox, its coldness making you shiver. The meat is still pink and glistening, with a few stray hairs from the cow still attached. Your housekeeper had given you this tip earlier, whispering that fresh meat on the brow draws out the nervous humors. You're not entirely sure what a nervous humor is, but it sounds like something you'd want to draw out with raw meat. In Victorian households, especially among the middle class, home remedies were king. Doctors were expensive, so housewives became amateur pharmacists, brewing potions and applying poultices for everything from headaches to insomnia. The theory behind the raw meat remedy was based on humoral medicine, the idea that the body had four fluids humors that needed balancing. Insomnia was thought to be caused by excess blood in the brain, so applying something cold like raw meat would draw out the excess and calm the nerves. Here sthe, veal wasn't the only meat on the menu for insomnia. Some housewives swore by rabbit livers, claiming their moisture was particularly effective at soothing the brain. Others used slices of raw beef, which had the added bonus of turning brown and gross over time, giving you a nice visual reminder of how long you'd been lying there. And for the truly adventurous, there was the oyster poultice. Yes, raw oysters on the forehead. The slimy texture was supposed to cool the neural pathways, but it probably just made you smell like a seafood market. Now for the part. Historians argue about whether these meat poultices were harmless quackery or low-key dangerous. On one hand, you have domestic manuals from the 1860s recommending raw meat as a safe and natural cure, with recipes for poultices that included herbs like chamomile mixed in with the meat. On the other hand, there's the obvious risk of bacterial infection. Remember, this is before germ theory was widely accepted, so no one was washing the meat before slapping it on their forehead. Let's imagine you're brave enough to try this. You lie back on your horsehair mattress, placing the slab of veal on your forehead. The coldness is shocking at first, then numbing. The meat feels slimy and slightly sticky, with tiny droplets of blood trickling down your temples. You try to relax, but all you can think about is whether the butcher cleaned this meat properly, or if there's a cow somewhere wondering where its forehead meat went. Here's a fun twist: some housewives believed that the meat had to be fresh from the slaughterhouse for maximum effect. So you might find yourself rushing to the butcher at dusk, asking for the freshest cut available, while the butcher gives you a strange look. Then you'd hurry home, praying the meat didn't start to spoil before you could slap it on your head. Talk about pressure to get some sleep. But wait, it gets better. If raw meat wasn't doing the trick, there was always the warm meat poultice. This involved heating the meat slightly but not cooking it, because that would defeat the purpose, then applying it to the forehead. The idea was that the warmth would open the pores and let the nervous humors escape. In reality, it probably just made the meat smell worse and attracted flies. Now, let's talk about the practical problems. First off, mess. Raw meat tends to drip, so you'd have to put a towel under your head to keep the sheets from staining. Second, smell. Even fresh meat has a distinct odor, and when combined with the stuffy Victorian bedroom, it's a recipe for nausea. Third, pets. Your cat would probably be very interested in the delicious smelling treat on your forehead, leading to some awkward midnight wrestling matches. But perhaps the worst part was the social aspect. Can you imagine explaining to your spouse why there's a slab of veal on your head? Oh, just treating my nervous humors, dear. Pass the salt, would you? And if you had guests over, good luck hiding the meat in the icebox without raising eyebrows. No, that's not for dinner tomorrow, trust me, you wouldn't want to eat that. As you lie there, forehead covered in raw meat, listening to the clock tick and the cat sniffing around your pillow, you might start to miss the metal headgear. At least that thing was dry and relatively odorless. This is just a recipe for a sleepless night and a possible case of food poisoning. But don't worry, the Victorians had the opposite problem too. Some inventors thought the solution was to make your bed as cold as possible. Next time, we'll talk about the health reformers who swore by iron beds and icy sheets. Spoiler alert, you'll want to keep your long johns on. Picture this: it's 2 a.m. in 1887, and you're wearing a silk gown that cost more than your maid's annual salary, tiptoeing through a hedge maze lit by hundreds of gas lanterns. The air is thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the faint sound of a string quartet playing green sleeves off-key. Welcome to the Victorian equivalent of a midnight rave, except instead of glow sticks, they have phosphorescent fungi, and instead of energy drinks, they have warm milk laced with opium. Let's start with the basics. Why on earth would wealthy Victorians trade their feather beds for a midnight stroll? In high society, insomnia wasn't just a problem, it was a status symbol. The busier you were, the more nervous exhaustion you had, and the more elaborate your cure needed to be. So instead of popping a melatonin, they threw parties at dawn, convinced that walking in the magical hour before sunrise would reset their circadian rhythms. Never mind that most of them stayed up gossiping until 5 a.m. then complained about being tired all day. Classic rich people problems. Here's a: these midnight weren't just walks. Oh no, that would be too simple. The moonlight mushroom hunt, cure the spleen. Now for the part. Historians still argue about whether these midnight jaunts were genuine attempts to sleep or just another way for the rich to show off. On one hand, you have diaries from socialites like Lady Cassandra Fitzwilliam, who swore that a midnight constitutional among the rosebushes helped her sleep. On the other hand, there's the fact that these events often involved more champagne than fresh air, and the only thing guests were curing was their boredom. Let's imagine you're at one of these parties. You're holding a tiny silver basket, searching for glowing mushrooms in the hedge maze. The gas lanterns cast spooky shadows, and every time you hear a twig snap, you jump, half expecting a highwayman, half expecting a fellow guest who has fallen into a flower bed. The string quartet is now playing a waltz, but someone keeps hitting a wrong note, like a musical version of a mosquito buzzing in your ear. Here's a fun twist: some hosts believed that night air had special properties, so they designed gardens specifically for midnight strolls. These gardens had winding paths that forced guests to walk slowly, benches placed under calming trees like willows, because they look sad and Victorian people thought sadness was romantic, and even little temples where you could sit and contemplate the moon. It's like a fancy version of a modern mindfulness app, but with more lace and fewer guided meditations. But wait, it gets better. Let's talk about the refreshments. Instead of chips and dip, you might find a table set with cold pheasant pie, blancmange, which is like jello but creamier and more confusing, and cups of warm milk mixed with brandy. The idea was that the milk would soothe your nerves, and the brandy would, well, probably just make you fall asleep in a flower bed. There's a story of one earl who passed out in a rose bush during a midnight, only to be found the next morning with petals stuck in his mutton chops. Now, let's think about the practical problems. First off, clothing. Women's evening gowns in the 1880s had corsets so tight you could barely breathe, let alone walk through a garden. Men wore tailcoats and top hats, which are not exactly ideal for navigating hedge mazes. Second, bugs. All those flowers and lanterns attracted every mosquito in a 5-mile radius, so you'd end up with more bites than a picnic blanket. Third, the cold. Even in summer, English nights can be chilly, so you'd have to drape a fur stole over your silk gown, which looked ridiculous but was better than hypothermia. But perhaps the most hilarious part was the social pressure. If you didn't attend these midnight parties, you were considered old-fashioned or, worse, boring. So even if you'd rather be in bed, you had to put on your fanciest clothes and pretend to enjoy searching for glowing mushrooms at 3 a.m. It's like being forced to go to a networking event when all you want is to watch Netflix in your pajamas. As you wander through the garden, basket of glowing mushrooms in hand, listening to the off-key quartet and trying not to trip over your own train, you might start to miss your uncomfortable horsehair mattress. At least there, you didn't have to make small talk with the countess about the medicinal properties of moonlit fungi. But don't worry, the Victorians had even more creative ways to avoid sleep. Next time, we'll talk about the doctors who told their patients to drink vinegar instead of tea. No, I'm not kidding. Bring a straw. Picture this: it's 4 p.m. in your Victorian drawing room, and you're staring at a teacup filled with something that looks like weak apple juice but smells like a salad dressing. Your doctor, Dr. Mortimer Grimshaw, yes, that's a real Victorian doctor name vibe, has just recommended you swap your daily Earl Grey for a concoction of distilled vinegar and warm water, sweetened with a pinch of sugar to take the edge off. Spoiler alert, the edge is still very much there, and it's currently burning a hole in your esophagus. Let's start with the. In the mid-19th century, caffeine was public enemy number one for nervous disorders. Doctors like Grimshaw believed that tea and coffee overstimulated the nerve fibers, leading to insomnia, anxiety, and God forbid excitable bowel movements. The solution: a complete caffeine detox, often replaced with liquids that were somehow worse. The logic went, if coffee keeps you awake, then something that tastes like battery acid will surely put you to sleep. Makes perfect sense, right here. Essay, vinegar wasn't the only coffee substitute. Some doctors recommended dandelion root tea, which tastes like dirt steeped in dishwater. Others swore by roasted chicory, which is basically coffee's bitter cousin. But the was burnt toast tea, yes, literally toasting bread until it's charcoal, then steeping it in hot water. The idea was that the charred bread would absorb excess nervous energy, but it probably just made you feel like you were drinking liquid campfire. Now for the part. Historians argue whether these vinegar cures were well-meaning or just sadistic. On one hand, you have medical journals from 1845 praising vinegar as a natural sedative, citing cases where patients like Mrs. Gertrude Bickerstaff of Bath claimed she slept like a log after replacing her morning coffee with vinegar tonic. On the other hand, there's the small matter that Mrs. Bickerstaff probably passed out from dehydration, since drinking vinegar all day tends to make you avoid liquids at all costs. Let's imagine you're brave enough to try this. You lift the teacup to your lips, praying the sugar will mask the vinegar's bite. It doesn't. The first sip hits you like a lemon wedge in the eye, making your cheeks involuntarily suck inward. You gag, then force yourself to swallow, feeling the liquid burn all the way down. Your maid, standing in the corner, tries to hide her smirk but fails miserably. Here's a fun twist: some doctors believed that vinegar needed a boost, so they added ingredients like crushed cloves or a dash of cayenne pepper. The theory was that the spices would stimulate the digestive tract, which sounds great until you realize you're drinking spiced vinegar at tea time. It's like someone took a margarita recipe and removed all the fun parts. But wait, it gets better. If vinegar wasn't doing the trick, there was always the milk and vinegar cure. This involved drinking a glass of warm milk mixed with a tablespoon of vinegar before bed. The idea was that the acid would curdle the milk in your stomach, creating a soothing layer that would calm your nerves. In reality, it probably just gave you heartburn and made your stomach growl like a rabid dog. Now, let's talk about the practical problems. First off, breath. Drinking vinegar all day turns your breath into a walking salad dressing, which is great if you're trying to ward off vampires but not so great for social interactions. Second, teeth. Vinegar is acidic, so after a few days, your teeth would start to feel like they're made of chalk. Third, social life. Imagine inviting friends over for tea and serving them vinegar tonic. Oh, don't mind the smell, it's a new health craze. Yeah, good luck keeping those friends. But perhaps the worst part was the withdrawal. Caffeine withdrawal in the Victorian era wasn't just a headache, it was considered a moral failing. Doctors like Grimshaw would lecture patients about the evils of coffee, comparing caffeine addiction to alcoholism. So every time you craved a cup of tea, you'd feel guilty, which only made the insomnia worse. It's a vicious cycle of guilt and vinegar. As you sit there, nursing your cup of vinegar tea and trying not to vomit, you might start to miss the raw meat on your forehead. At least that was only cold and slimy, not actively trying to dissolve your insides. But don't worry, the Victorians had even more creative ways to mess with your diet. Next time, we'll talk about the who used. Spoiler alert, it involved more itching than sleeping. Picture this: it's midnight in Haworth Parsonage, 1847, and you're huddled over a writing desk, quill in hand, trying to finish the latest chapter of Jane Eyre. The oil lamp sputters, casting shadows on the stacks of manuscripts piled around you. Your eyes are gritty, your neck aches from hunching over the page, and every time you try to sleep, Mr. Rochester's brooding face pops into your mind like a Victorian version of a meme. Welcome to the insomnia-ridden world of Charlotte Brontë and her truly wild solution involving coal tar and a paintbrush. Let us start with Charlotte Brontë, like many Victorian intellectuals, suffered from chronic insomnia. Scholars believe it was a mix of stress. Writing groundbreaking novels tends to do that, poor diet, and the fact that she lived in a drafty parsonage with more ghosts than heating. But instead of counting sheep, Charlotte turned to a remedy that would make even the hardiest Victorian wince: coal tar, the sticky black gunk used to pave roads, slathered directly onto her scalp. Here's the coal tar wasn't just for roads in the 19th century. It was a miracle cure-all in Victorian medicine. Doctors used it to treat everything from eczema to dandruff, convinced that its antiseptic properties read, strong smell could kill any ailment. Charlotte's doctor, a certain Dr. John Caius, real name, recommended it as a nerve soother, claiming that the tar's smell would overpower the brain's excited state. Translation: if your scalp smells like a tar pit, maybe your brain will be too distracted to stay awake. Now for the part. Historians still argue about whether Charlotte actually used coal tar or if this is just a dramatic legend. On one hand, we have her letters to her publisher, where she mentions applying a medicinal unction to the scalp to ease her nervous irritation. On the other hand, there's the fact that no one in their right mind would voluntarily put road tar on their head unless they were a Brontë, who seemed to specialize in dramatic self-care. Let us imagine you're Charlotte, desperate for sleep. You dip a paintbrush into a jar of coal tar, which looks like someone mixed motor oil with molasses. The smell hits you first. Imagine a cross between burnt rubber and a campfire, with a hint of something chemically. You take a deep breath, then start painting the sticky goo onto your scalp, wincing as it chills your skin and tangles in your hair. Here's a fun twist: Charlotte didn't just slather on pure coal tar. Oh no, that would be too simple. She mixed it with lavender oil to mask the odor, creating a scent that was part tar pit, part flower shop. The result was a fragrance that could clear a room in seconds, but she thought it was soothing. It's like spraying perfume over a garbage fire and calling it aromatherapy. But wait, it gets better. Coal tar is sticky, like permanently stain your pillowcases sticky. So Charlotte had to wear a linen cap to bed, which not only kept the tar off her sheets but also made her look like a Victorian version of a beekeeper. Imagine trying to sleep with a sticky, smelly cap on your head, while your hair slowly turns into a tarred rope. Romantic, right? Now, let us talk about the practical problems. First off, washing. Removing coal tar from hair is no easy feat. Charlotte probably had to use lye soap, which is harsh enough to strip paint, let alone tar. Second, itching. Coal tar can irritate the scalp, so instead of calming her nerves, she might have spent the night scratching her head like a caged monkey. Third, the look. When she took off the cap in the morning, her hair was probably matted into dreadlocks, which is not the best look for a proper Victorian lady. But perhaps the most ironic part is that coal tar actually does have some medicinal properties, just not for insomnia. Today, it's still used in shampoos for dandruff, and in ointments for eczema. But back then, they used it for everything from toothaches to hysteria, because Victorians loved a good multi-purpose remedy, even if it smelled like a factory fire. As you lie there, head wrapped in a tar-stained cap, listening to the wind howl outside and smelling like a freshly paved road, you might start to miss the vinegar tea. At least that was drinkable, even if it burned your throat. This is just a recipe for a sticky, Smelly night of misery. But don't worry, the Victorians had even more creative ways to torture their scalps. Next time, we'll talk about the magnetic healers who used horseshoes to cure insomnia. Spoiler alert, it involves more metal and less magic. Picture this, it's 1875, and you're sitting in a dimly lit parlor that smells like a combination of patchouli and old books. The curtains are drawn, the only light coming from a dozen candles shaped like weight, are those horseshoes. You're a man named Professor Phineas Q Magnetico. Yes, that's a made-up name, but trust me, real Victorian healers had weirder monikers. Is wearing a velvet robe embroidered with silver lightning bolts, waving a rusty horseshoe over your head like he's trying to exorcise a bad dream. Let's start with the. Magnetic therapy was all the rage in Victorian England, thanks to the theories of Franz Mesmer. Yes, where mesmerize comes from. Mesmer believed that the body had the animal magnetism, and that trained healers could manipulate it with objects like magnets and, you guessed it, horseshoes. By the 1870s, this had evolved into a cottage industry of charlatans promising to cure insomnia by aligning your magnetic fields with iron horseshoes. Never mind that horseshoes are just pieces of metal. Logic wasn't their strong suit. Here's the. Not all horseshoes were created equal in the world of Victorian. The best ones were said to be collected from a white horse at midnight, because Victorians loved adding arbitrary conditions to their cures. Some healers would heat the horseshoe over a candle until it was warm, claiming the heat activated the magnetic energy. Others would attach the horseshoe to a headband, so you could wear it like a tiara, because nothing says relaxation like a hunk of metal on your forehead. Now for the part. Historians argue whether these magnetic healers were sincere believers or outright frauds. On one hand, you have accounts from patients like Mrs. Euphemia Thistlethwaite, who swore that Professor Magnetico's horseshoe ritual cured her of sleeplessness in 3 sessions. On the other hand, there's the fact that Mrs. Thistlethwaite probably just fell asleep from boredom during the hour-long ceremony of waving a horseshoe around. Modern science, meanwhile, says that any effects were pure placebo unless you're particularly sensitive to rusty metal vibes. Let's imagine you're undergoing the treatment. Professor Magnetico instructs you to lie on a chaise longue covered in purple velvet. Of course, he holds the horseshoe about 6 inches from your forehead, muttering something about aligning the lunar nodes with your pineal gland. The horseshoe is cold and slightly damp, probably from being stored in the basement. You try to relax, but all you can think about is where this horseshoe has been on a horse that pulls a beer wagon. Maybe here's a fun twist. Some believed that horseshoes worked better when paired with other magnetic objects, like lodestones, natural magnets, or even pieces of amber. So you might find yourself lying on a bed of crystals, with a horseshoe on your chest and a lodestone under your pillow, looking like a human magnet experiment. The healer would then wave his hands over you, making shushing sounds, which is either very calming or very creepy, depending on his bedside manner. But wait, it gets better. For the truly dedicated insomniac, there was the magnetic sleep cabinet. This was a small room lined with horseshoes, where you'd lie on a metal cot while the healer turned a crank that rotated a giant horseshoe above your head. The idea was that the rotating magnetic field would lull your brain into submission, but in reality, it probably just gave you a headache from the noise of the crank. Now, let's talk about the practical problems. First off, rust. Horseshoes rust, especially when they're being waved around in a damp parlor. You might end up with rust stains on your pillowcase, or worse, in your hair. Second, superstition. If the healer said the horseshoe had to be from a white horse, good luck finding one. Most horses are brown or black. Third, the look. Wearing a horseshoe headband to bed is a great way to ensure your spouse never wants to cuddle again. But perhaps the most entertaining part was the theater of it all loved to put on a show, with dramatic lighting, mysterious incantations, and lots of hand-waving. It was like going to a magic show, except the trick was making you believe a horseshoe could cure your insomnia. And for some people, the drama was enough to take their mind off their sleeplessness, kind of like how watching a boring movie can make you drowsy. As you lie there, listening to Professor Magnetico drone on about magnetic fluxes and feeling the cold horseshoe hover over your face, you might start to miss the cold tar on your scalp. At least that was a straightforward kind of misery, not this elaborate metal-themed magic show. But don't worry, the Victorians had even more creative ways to use metal for sleep. Next time, we'll talk about the health reformers who thought sleeping on iron beds was the key to good rest. Spoiler alert, it involves more squeaking and less comfort. Picture this, it's 1865, and you're standing in a furniture showroom that looks like a cross between a jail and a science lab. The air smells of fresh paint and metal polish, and every bed in sight is made of iron spindly legs, barred headboards, and mattresses so thin they might as well be made of cardboard. A salesman in a starched collar approaches, rubbing his hands together like a villain in a melodrama. "Ah, madam sir. Feast your eyes on the healthful iron bedstead guaranteed to banish insomnia and moral decay in one fell swoop. Let's start with the. In the mid-19th century, health reformers went on a crusade against wooden beds, convinced they harbored miasma, those mysterious disease-causing vapors and vermin. Iron was seen as the holy grail of bed frames, easy to disinfect, non-porous, and supposedly conductive of healing magnetic energies. The most famous advocate was a man named Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, yes, that Kellogg, who ran a sanitarium where patients were forced to sleep on iron cots with horsehair mattresses. His logic: discomfort equals virtue, and a hard iron bed would prevent impure thoughts. Here essay, iron beds weren't just functional, some were downright artistic. Look at that bed over there with ornate scrollwork shaped like lilies and vines. The salesman calls it the purity model, claiming the floral design soothe the nervous system. Never mind that the iron is so cold it could give you frostbite, or that the scrollwork is perfect for snagging your nightgown. And for the truly fancy, there were beds with built-in alarm clocks, more on that later, or even drawers for storing. Well, no one's really sure, but they added to the metal mayhem. Now for the part. Historians argue whether iron beds were a health breakthrough or a marketing scam. On one hand, you have pamphlets from the Health Reform Association claiming that iron bed users slept 30% more soundly and had fewer digestive issues. On the other hand, there are letters from patients at Kellogg's sanitarium complaining of nightly shivers and bruises from the unforgiving metal. Modern researchers point out that iron conducts heat, meaning you'd be freezing in winter and sticky in summer, a real Goldilocks nightmare. Let's imagine you've been convinced to buy one of these beauties. It's delivered to your bedroom, and the first thing you notice is how heavy it is. 4 strong men nearly throw their backs out moving it. You run your hand over the iron bars, which are as cold as ice even in summer. The mattress is horsehair, of course, because softness was seen as sinful. You lie down, and the bed frame creaks like a ship in a storm, every movement sending vibrations through the metal. Here's a fun twist: some health reformers believed that iron beds should be placed away from walls to allow air to circulate, which meant you'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced you're floating in space. Others recommended sleeping with the windows wide open, even in winter, because fresh air purifies the blood. So there you are, lying on a cold iron bed, shivering under a thin blanket, listening to the wind howl through the window and wondering why anyone thought this was a good idea. But wait, it gets better. Let us talk about the electrotherapeutic iron beds. Some inventors attached small copper wires to the frame, claiming that a gentle electric current would recharge the body's vital forces. The only problem, the wires were usually loose, so you'd get a mild shock every time you turned over. It's like sleeping on a bed of static electricity, great for keeping you awake, not so great for actually sleeping. Now, let us discuss the practical problems. First off, noise. Iron beds creak more than a floorboard in a haunted house. Every time you shift, the metal joints make a sound like someone cracking knuckles. Romantic, right? Second, rust. Even the best painted iron beds would start to rust in damp Victorian bedrooms, leaving orange stains on your sheets. Third, comfort. Have you ever tried to cuddle with a metal bar? It's about as cozy as hugging a fence post. But perhaps the most ironic part is that iron beds were supposed to promote moral purity, but they probably had the opposite effect. Imagine being so cold and uncomfortable that you spend the whole night tossing and turning, which would definitely lead to impure thoughts like plotting how to burn the bed and buy a nice wooden one. As you lie there on your iron prison, listening to the bed frame creak and feeling the cold metal seep through your nightgown, you might start to miss the magnetic horseshoe on your head. At least that was a temporary annoyance, not a permanent fixture in your bedroom. But don't worry, the Victorians had even more creative ways to make sleeping miserable. Next time, we'll talk about the rich folks who paid servants to rock them to sleep all night. Spoiler alert, it involves more manual labor than relaxation. Picture this, it's 2 a.m. in the opulent bedroom of a Victorian duke, and you're lying on a four-poster bed that's more like a throne on springs. But instead of counting sheep, you're listening to the steady creak 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 of a servant named Alfred, who has been ordered to stand in the corner and push a lever attached to your bed frame all night long. Welcome to the world of wealthy insomniacs who decided that human-powered rocking was the key to sleep, because nothing says relaxation like knowing someone's losing sleep so you can get some. Let us start with the. In Victorian high society, having a servant stay up all night to rock your bed wasn't just a cure, it was a status symbol. The logic went, if you were rich enough to afford a full-time bed rocker, you must be important enough to deserve it. Doctors like Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, yes, real name, actually recommended this mechanical rocking therapy, claiming that the gentle motion mimicked a mother's arms. Never mind that Alfred has been at it for 4 hours and his arms are about to fall off. Here bed rocking wasn't a one-size-fits-all deal. Some wealthy families had custom-built rocking bedsteads with hidden levers with padded handles to make the servant's job slightly less miserable. Others preferred a more hands-on approach, hiring 2 servants to stand on either side of the bed and push it back and forth in sync like a human seesaw for the rich. There's even a record of a countess who insisted on having her bed rocked to the rhythm of a metronome, because nothing says natural sleep like a mechanical beat. Now for the part. Historians argue whether this was genuine medical advice or just another way for the rich to exploit their servants. On one hand, you have diaries from socialites like Lady Beatrice Pembroke, who swore that Alfred's steady rocking lulled me into the deepest slumber. On the other hand, there are letters from servants complaining of sore muscles, numb hands, and the occasional accident where they fell asleep and let the bed crash to a halt, waking the master and earning a week's worth of extra chores. Let us imagine you're the duke in this scenario. You lie back on your feather mattress because rich people could ignore the hard bed advice, feeling the bed gently sway. Alfred stands in the corner, his face blank, pushing the lever with the enthusiasm of a man mowing a lawn. The room is dark except for a single candle, and the only sound is the creak of the bed and Alfred's occasional yawn. You try to relax, but all you can think about is whether Alfred is plotting your murder with that lever. Here's a fun twist: some servants got creative to stay awake. They recite poetry under their breath, count the threads in the carpet, or even play I Spy with the furniture. One valet named Ebenezer wrote in his memoirs that he used to tell himself stories about the bed's previous owners, imagining them as pirates or princes to pass the time. It's like a Victorian version of scrolling through your phone at 3 a.m. except without the blue light. But wait, it gets better. If one servant wasn't enough, some families had a rocking rotation. They hire 3 servants to work 8-hour shifts, ensuring the bed never stopped moving. Can you imagine? Alfred rocks from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. then Betty takes over, followed by Charlie. It's like a relay race, but instead of a baton, they're passing a bed lever. The only problem keeping the rhythm consistent. Imagine falling asleep to a gentle sway, then jolting awake because Betty rocks faster than Alfred. Now, let's talk about the practical problems. First off, trust. You have to trust that your servant won't get tired and start rocking too hard, turning your bed into a roller coaster. Second, privacy. Having someone stand in your bedroom all night is about as private as a fishbowl. Third, the moral dilemma. How can you sleep soundly knowing someone is up all night working for you? But hey, it's the Victorian era. Morals were a flexible concept for the rich. But perhaps the most hilarious part was the fashion aspect. Some servants were required to wear special rocking uniforms, usually a simple tunic and trousers, but with extra padding on the elbows for leaning on the lever. It's like a medieval jester outfit, but for bed rockers. And if the servants sweated too much, which they did, because rocking a heavy bed is hard work, they have to change into a fresh uniform mid-shift, which must have been awkward for everyone involved. As you lie there, gently rocking in your servant-powered bed, listening to Alfred's quiet humming and the occasional creak of the floorboards, you might start to miss your old iron bed. At least that was uncomfortable, but didn't require a human sacrifice. But don't worry, the Victorians had even more creative ways to involve others in their insomnia cures. Next time, we'll talk about the British Parliament debating whether to regulate insomnia. Spoiler alert, it involves more hot air than solutions. Picture this: it's 1878, and you're crammed into the public gallery of the British House of Commons, surrounded by the smell of old wood and too many men in top hats. Below you, members of Parliament are debating a motion that sounds like a bad joke, that this House do consider measures for the prevention and cure of insomnia among Her Majesty's subjects. The Speaker bangs his gavel, and a portly gentleman in a frock coat stands up, adjusting his pince-nez glasses. Prepare for the most boring political debate about sleeplessness you've ever not quite stayed awake for. Let's start with the Victorian era saw a surge in public health legislation, from Clean Water Acts to factory regulations. So why not add insomnia to the list? In 1877, a backbench MP named Sir Archibald Ponsonby, real name Vibe, introduced a sleeplessness prevention bill, arguing that widespread insomnia was impairing the productivity of the nation. His logic: if workers couldn't sleep, they couldn't work, which meant less money for the empire. Never mind that most of them were probably because they worked 16-hour days in factories. Here's the debate wasn't just about cures, it was about criminalizing sleeplessness. Okay, not exactly, but some MPs suggested regulating over-the-counter sleep aids, like opium, which was sold in pharmacies like candy. One particularly zealous MP, Sir Reginald Blinker, proposed a law that would require anyone buying more than an ounce of laudanum to provide a doctor's note. The problem: most doctors handed out opium prescriptions like candy too, so it was like regulating candy with more candy. Now for the part. Historians argue whether this was a genuine attempt to help the public or just politicians looking for a cause. On one hand, you have Hansard, the official record showing MPs discussing the nervous epidemic of our time with furrowed brows. On the other hand, there are contemporary cartoons depicting MPs falling asleep during the debate, which is pretty on brand for a discussion about insomnia. Modern scholars point out that the bill never passed, mostly because no one could agree on whether insomnia was a medical problem or a moral failing. Let us imagine you're in the gallery, trying to stay awake. Sir Archibald is droning on about the importance of regular bedtime routines, waving a copy of Dr. Kellogg's sleep manual. I propose, he says, that all workplaces enforce a 10 p.m. curfew for their employees. The opposition benches erupt in laughter because telling factory workers when to sleep is like telling a cat not to knock over your tea. Here's a fun twist: some MPs had truly wild solutions. One suggested building public sleeping galleries in parks, where insomniacs could go to nap during the day. Another proposed a tax on noisy clocks, because the tick-tock is a menace to the nervous system. And my personal favorite, a plan to replace all street lamps with blue glass, because someone read that blue light calms the brain. Spoiler alert, it just made the streets look like a bad sci-fi movie. But wait, it gets better. Let us talk about the opium debate. MPs argued for hours about whether laudanum was more helpful or harmful. Sir Reginald Blinker claimed it was a curse upon the working classes, while his opponent, Lady Ada Lovelace, yes, the mathematician, though she wasn't an MP, pointed out that it was the only thing that let her sleep between code-breaking sessions. The compromise: they decided to do nothing, which is classic parliamentary style. Now, let us discuss the practical problems. First off, enforcement. How exactly would you make sure everyone went to bed at 10 p.m.? Hire an army of bedtime police. Second, hypocrisy. Most MPs stayed up late drinking port and debating until the early hours, then complained about being tired. It's like a parent telling their kid to go to bed while they stay up watching TV. Third, the public response. Factory workers probably laughed themselves to sleep at the idea of their bosses caring about their sleep. But perhaps the most entertaining part was the media coverage. Newspapers mocked the debate, publishing cartoons of MPs sleeping through their own speeches, or proposing laws to ban snoring in the House of Commons. One satirical paper suggested that the real cure for insomnia was listening to parliamentary debates, which was guaranteed to put even the most wakeful soul to sleep. As you sit there in the gallery, listening to the droning voices and the occasional snore from the benches below, you might start to understand why the Victorians had so much trouble sleeping between horsehair mattresses and parliamentary debates. It's a wonder anyone got any rest. But don't worry, the insomnia-themed legislation didn't end there. Next time, we'll talk about the inventors who decided to put alarms on baby cribs. Spoiler alert, it's as bad as it sounds. Picture this: it's 1855, and you're tiptoeing into your baby's nursery, praying not to wake the little bundle of joy and screaming. But instead of a peaceful cradle, you find a wooden contraption that looks like a cross between a birdcage and a grandfather clock. Attached to the side of the crib is a brass alarm clock, its pendulum swinging ominously, while a series of gears beneath the mattress click like a bomb about to explode. Welcome to the world of Victorian baby sleep innovations, where inventors decided that the best way to get a baby to sleep was to wake them up with an alarm clock. Yes, you read that right. Let us start with the Victorians were obsessed with scientific, convinced that every aspect of a baby's life could be optimized with technology. When it came to sleep, they believed that babies who didn't nap on schedule were disrupting the household harmony. Read, keeping parents awake. So inventors like Mr. Horatio Cribb, yes, that's a made-up name but fits the era, set out to create mechanical cribs that would train babies to sleep through the night even if it meant scaring them half to death with loud noises. Here the most infamous invention was the automatic infant sleeper, patented in 1853. This crib had a simple mechanism. If the baby stopped moving for more than 5 minutes, a small bell attached to the footboard would ring, startling the baby into moving again. The idea was that constant motion would lull them to sleep, but in reality, it was more like a never-ending game of Simon Says for infants. Some models even had a crank that parents could turn to rock the crib, because manual labor is just what you want to do at 3 a.m. Now for the part, historians argue whether these mechanical cribs were well-intentioned or borderline abusive. On one hand, you have parenting manuals from the time praising the automatic infant sleeper as a blessing to exhausted mothers, claiming that babies quickly adapted to the gentle reminder. On the other hand, there are letters from nannies complaining that the bells scared the daylights out of the little darlings, leading to more crying than sleeping. Modern child psychologists would probably call it sleep torture, but Victorians called it progressive parenting. Let's imagine you're a Victorian parent trying this thing out. You place your baby in the crib, tucking them into starched linen sheets. The moment the baby settles down, the bell rings ding, making them flail their arms. You sigh, reach over to quiet the bell, and wait. 30 seconds later, ding. Again. It's like having a tiny alarm clock that goes off every time your baby relaxes, which is about as helpful as a chocolate teapot. Here's a fun twist: some inventors took the mechanical crib a step further, adding therapeutic vibrations. These cribs had small motors that buzzed the mattress, supposed to mimic the sensation of being carried. The problem: the motors were loud and often overheated, turning the crib into a vibrating, smoking hazard. There's a record of one mother who found her baby's crib pulsing like a faulty telegraph machine at 2 a.m. Talk about a rude awakening. But wait, it gets better. For the truly dedicated or deranged parents, there was the clockwork cradle. This used a system of weights and pulleys, like a grandfather clock, to rock the crib automatically for up to 8 hours. The only catch: you had to wind it up like a toy, and if you forgot, the crib would stop mid-rock, waking the baby. Imagine stumbling out of bed at 4 a.m. half asleep, to wind your baby's crib like it's a music box. Now, let's talk about the practical problems. First off, noise. The bells and motors were so loud they woke up the entire household, defeating the purpose of getting the baby to sleep. Second, safety. Loose gears and exposed wires in these cribs were a disaster waiting to happen. Some babies even grabbed the pendulums and tried to eat them. Third, sanity. Parents quickly realized that instead of solving their sleep problems, these machines created new ones, like worrying about whether the crib would explode or not. But perhaps the most ironic part was the marketing. Advertisements for these cribs showed happy mothers knitting by the fire, while their babies slept peacefully in the mechanical contraption. In reality, the mothers were probably hiding in the pantry, drinking laudanum to cope with the constant dinging and buzzing. It's like those modern ads for easy-to-use baby gadgets that actually require a PhD to operate. As you stand there in the nursery, listening to the bell ding for the 100th time and watching your baby flinch, you might start to miss the simple days of a wooden cradle. At least with a manual cradle, you could control the rocking and didn't have to worry about your baby developing a fear of alarm clocks. But don't worry, the Victorians had an even more controversial solution for baby and parent insomnia. Next time, we'll talk about the opium that was basically baby's first drug, spoon-fed and ready to go. Spoiler alert, it's as bad as it sounds, but somehow legal. Picture this, it's 1860, and you're standing in a Victorian pharmacy that smells like a mix of licorice and old books. The pharmacist, Mr. Ebenezer Mope, slides a small brown bottle across the counter, no label, just a cork stopper and a faint aroma of sweetened vinegar. "There you are, madam," he says with a wink, "a draught of Godfrey's cordial, guaranteed to quiet the most troublesome babe or soothe the weariest nerves." You peer into the bottle, where a dark brown liquid shimmers in the gaslight, unaware that you're holding a potion that's part miracle cure, part silent killer. Let's start with the opium, often called laudanum, was the Victorian equivalent of a Swiss Army knife used for everything from toothaches to childbirth to, of course, insomnia. Made by steeping opium in alcohol and sweetening it with sugar or honey, it was sold over the counter without a prescription, cheaper than tea, and more widely available than clean water. Doctors like Dr. William Buchan, author of Domestic Medicine, recommended it as a safe and effective nervine, claiming that a few drops will induce a gentle sleep without harmful effects. Spoiler alert, they were very, very wrong. Here's the opium wasn't just for adults. Oh no, Victorians had special formulas for kids. Godfrey's cordial, the most infamous, was marketed as a soothing syrup for teething infants, containing 10% opium by volume. Another popular brand, Dalby's Carminative, advertised itself as a cure for colic, but its main ingredient was laudanum. Parents would spoon-feed these syrups to babies, not realizing they were essentially giving them baby's first opioid. There's a record of one mother who gave her infant a teaspoon of Godfrey's every hour, yes, every hour, until the child fell into a coma. Yikes. Now for the part. Historians argue about whether Victorians were willfully ignorant of opium's dangers or just misinformed. On one hand, you have medical journals from the 1830s warning about laudanum poisoning, describing cases of blue lips and shallow breathing. On the other hand, there are advertisements like this one from 1855, Mrs. J. of Manchester says, "My baby cried day and night until I gave her Dalby's. Now she sleeps like an angel, bless this wonderful medicine." Modern researchers point out that the wonderful medicine was probably the reason the baby was so quiet she was high as a kite. Let's imagine you're a tired Victorian parent. It's 2 a.m. and your baby has been screaming for hours. You remember the bottle of Godfrey's you bought earlier, hidden in the kitchen cupboard. You pour a teaspoon into a tiny silver spoon, the liquid sticky and sweet. The baby gulps it down, smacking their lips. Within minutes, their crying fades, and they fall into a deep, unnatural sleep. You sigh with relief, not noticing their breathing has become shallow, or that their little hands are cold to the touch. Here's a fun twist: opium wasn't just for home use. Wealthy Victorians carried it in fancy silver flasks, like a posh version of a hip flask. Ladies kept it in their ridicule small purses, calling it medicinal wine to avoid scandal. There's a story of one duchess who took a nip of laudanum before every social event, claiming it helped her endure the tedium of small talk. No wonder Victorian parties were so quiet, everyone was high. But wait, it gets better. Let's talk about the opium eater subculture. Writers like Thomas de Quincey, author of Confessions of an English Opium Eater, romanticized opium use, describing vivid dreams and heightened creativity. This led to a wave of young intellectuals experimenting with laudanum, thinking it would unlock their artistic potential. Instead, they got constipation, liver damage, and the occasional overdose. It's like the Victorian version of smoking weed to write poetry, except more dangerous and less fun. Now, let us discuss the practical problems. First off, addiction. Opium is highly addictive, and many Victorians who started using it for insomnia ended up slaves to the bottle. There are records of people taking up to 60 drops, almost a full teaspoon at a time, which is enough to kill a modern adult. Second, mislabeling. Some pharmacies sold weak laudanum, but there was no standardization. You might get a mild dose or a lethal one. Third, the morning after. Even if you didn't overdose, opium left you groggy, constipated, and craving more. Perfect for a productive Victorian day, right? But perhaps the most ironic part was the medical establishment's slow response. It wasn't until the late 1800s, after thousands of deaths, that countries started regulating opium sales. In 1891, Britain finally required laudanum to be labeled as poison, but by then, the damage was done. Generations of Victorians had grown up thinking opium was a harmless sleep aid, not realizing it was a wolf in sheep's clothing. As you stand there in the nursery, watching your baby sleep too soundly, the faint smell of opium lingering in the air, you might start to miss the vinegar tea and raw meat. At least those were harmlessly gross. This is a ticking time bomb in a brown bottle. But don't worry, the Victorians had one last insomnia cure that didn't involve poison or metal cages. Next time, we'll talk about the simplest, most overlooked remedy of all: keeping a sleep diary. Spoiler alert, it's as boring as it sounds, but maybe that's the point. Picture this: it's 10 p.m. in 1890, and you're sitting at a rickety wooden desk, dipping a quill into an inkwell shaped like a seashell. The candle beside you flickers, casting shadows on the blank page of your leather-bound sleep diary. You take a deep breath, ready to document yet another night of staring at the ceiling, because in Victorian England, if you couldn't sleep, you might as well write about it. Welcome to the world of Feather, where ordinary people turn their sleepless nights into prose that's equal parts mundane and wildly entertaining. Let us start with the. Sleep diaries became a craze in the late Victorian era, thanks to the rise of self-help culture and the invention of cheap paper. Doctors like Dr. James Crichton Browne, yes, real name, recommended keeping a nightly record to identify the causes of nervous excitement. The idea was that writing down what you ate, how you felt, and when you finally dozed off would help you spot patterns. Never mind that most people just ended up with a journal full of complaints about horsehair mattresses. Here's the. Victorian sleep diaries weren't just for tracking sleep. Oh no, they were full of bizarre details. Take Mrs. Agnes Timms of Leeds, who dedicated an entire page to her pet cat's midnight antics. 117a.m. Mr. Whiskers knocked over the chamber pot. 203a.m. He began scratching at the door, demanding to be let out. 315a.m. I found him chasing a mouse under the bed, which kept me awake for another hour. Then there's Mr. Edwin Spooner, who recorded every single noise he heard. 247a.m. Clock ticking. 302a.m. Neighbor's dog barking. 310a.m. My own stomach growling. It's like a Victorian version of a white noise app, but written in cursive. Now for the part. Historians argue about whether these diaries actually helped people sleep or just gave them another reason to stay awake. On one hand, you have diaries like that of Miss Emily Dickinson, no, not that Dickinson, who wrote that putting pen to paper calms my nerves, even if the words are nonsensical. On the other hand, there are entries from people like Mr. Hubert Farnsworth, yes, the same one from earlier, who spent so much time writing about not sleeping that he, well, didn't he sleep? Modern psychologists say that journaling can help, but only if you don't turn it into a performance art. Let us imagine you're keeping one of these diaries. You dip your quill, careful not to spill ink on your nightgown. You write, Monday, 12th April could not sleep for the life of me. Tried lavender pillow made me sneeze, drank warm milk gave me indigestion, even considered putting raw meat on my forehead but thought better of it. The cat kept batting at the bed curtains, and the clock ticked so loudly I thought it might explode. At 4 a.m. I got up and ate a cold potato, which did nothing but make me feel sad. Here's a fun twist: some people turn their sleep diaries into creative writing exercises. Mrs. Beatrice Pemberton of Bath wrote hers in the form of letters to her late grandmother. Dearest Grandma, I fear I am cursed with the family insomnia. Last night, I counted 372 stripes on the wallpaper and invented 3 new recipes for cold mutton. How I wish you were here to tell me to stop overthinking and give me a cup of your dreadful chamomile tea. It's like therapy, but with more flowery language and less couch. But wait, it gets better. Let's talk about the sleep diary challenges. Some magazines ran contests for the most entertaining insomnia entry, offering prizes like a new feather pillow, ironic, since feathers were the enemy, or a subscription to a nerve tonic, probably just more vinegar. The winning entry in 1889 was from a man who wrote, I spent the night debating whether sheep count humans, or if humans count sheep. I think the sheep are winning. Now, let's discuss the practical problems. First off, ink stains. Dipping a quill at 3 a.m. is a recipe for disaster. You might end up with ink on your nightgown, your pillow, or even your face. Second, privacy. Imagine if your descendants found your sleep diary, 1890, March 5th, couldn't sleep because I ate too many pickles. Also, I think the maid is stealing my sugar. Not exactly Pulitzer Prize material, but definitely entertaining. Third, the act itself. Writing about not sleeping can be just as stimulating as counting sheep, which defeats the purpose. But perhaps the most charming part was the community aspect. Some people shared their sleep diaries with friends, swapping tips and commiserating over sleepless nights. It's like a Victorian version of a support group, but with more tea and fewer couches. There's a letter from 2 spinster sisters who wrote in their joint diary, Lucy slept for 3 hours, Agnes for 2. We agreed that tomorrow we shall try sleeping in each other's beds, just to confuse the insomnia. As you sit there, quill in hand, ink drying on the page, you might start to realize that the act of writing about not sleeping is strangely soothing. Maybe it's the rhythm of the pen on paper, or the knowledge that you're not alone in your sleeplessness. After all, if Mrs. Timms and her cat can get through the night, so can you. Now, as we wrap up this journey through Victorian insomnia cures, take a deep breath and let your shoulders relax. Imagine the candle in that sleep diary scene flickering out, the quill set aside, and the writer finally drifting off, maybe not on a horsehair mattress, but in a cozy modern bed with a memory foam pillow. The Victorians may have tried everything from metal headgear to opium, but here's the funny thing: the simplest remedies often work best. Maybe it's not about fancy machines or strange potions, but about creating a calm space and giving yourself permission to rest. So dim the lights, maybe listen to some gentle rain sounds, and let your mind wander. You don't need a mechanical rocking chair or a horseshoe on your head, just a quiet moment and a soft place to lie down. Think of all those Victorians tossing and turning, and take comfort in the fact that you live in a time when a good night's sleep is just a pillow away. So now, close your eyes if you haven't already, and let the stillness wrap around you like a warm blanket. Sleep comes when it's ready, and tonight, it might just be ready soon.